Okay, recording has started. So thank you everybody for another session of the Data and AI Architecture Group. Today we have Microsoft MVP Reid Havens who's going to talk to us about avoiding common pitfalls in models and reports, real lessons from the trenches. This is going to be a session full of very useful real life information from somebody that has already had to learn these lessons so that you don't have to learn them yourself. So and then that's a great thing to do. So um, keep in mind for the group, we also have a session coming up in a couple of weeks on columnar data storage as well. We got sessions going up until the end of, I believe, the first half of December. Then we'll take a break and we'll be back somewhere around the end of January. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you especially to Reid for offering the time to share his knowledge with us. And without further ado, Reid, the floor is yours. Everybody else, I will keep you all muted. If you have a question, feel free to use the chat. And at that point, if you are addressed, you can unmute yourself as well. All right. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Reid. And take it away.
My internet's a little spotty today for some reason, so hopefully I continue to come through, but I'm getting a couple of dropped pings here and there, just FYI. So feel free to ask me to repeat if I need to. Okay, let me go ahead and share my section here. Let me know when you can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see the bio.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so my name is Reid Havens. We'll do a little introduction about myself and then talk about what we will be going through today. So I've been in the BI space now for about 11 years, started all the way back with Excel and Power View, working my way into Power BI and going through and following closely the evolution of Microsoft. And one thing that I've found over the years is a lot of the passion that I have is with best practices and design around reporting, especially. So like a lot of other MVPs, I'm kind of end to end. I do everything from modeling to service configurations and development, training, anything in between. But my passion largely involves visualizations, hence name the VizWiz that you can see here on the screen itself. So it's something that I very much enjoy and was kindly given that as a nickname a few years ago by a colleague, and it's kind of personified itself into the little avatar that you see there at the top. But it's what I do a lot of focus on for the videos and everything that I do on my YouTube channel. But I try to cover everything. So if you like the content that you see today, I'll have a bunch of links available at the end. Okay, there we go. Okay, there's the drop pings. Am I back on and can you hear me?
Yeah, you're back on.
Okay, cool. Excellent. Okay. About 120 recorded videos and about 110 different live streams that I've done with various people from Microsoft program managers to a lot of other MVPs and industry experts. So I do those every Friday around 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, and something I really enjoy doing with a lot of my colleagues. So also encourage you to check those out. But enough about me. Let's talk about what we'll be going through today. So this talk and most of my talks, what I try to do is scale them up and down. So being able to take this and do it in 30 minutes, being able to do it upwards of 2 hours. So with this one, I try to go through various different parts of both the front end and the back end. I think given the time that we have today, I will likely be able to do a lot of the items that we have related to reporting, starting from a user experience that we have in terms of what we can curate for that, what practices to avoid, what best practices to implement. So from the reading view interactions, going into visualizations and design, and then slowly working our way into the back end as time permitting. But we'll have a lot of different conversations around those. Feel free to ask questions throughout this. I want to keep this conversational so I can also be able to interact with you as much as possible. And I'll have the chat open up over on the left, so I'll be keeping my eye on that. But otherwise, let's continue to go through and start to talk about some of these items. Make sure something's muted. Okay, there we go. So the idea behind a user experience curation goes into the story or the concept of, to quote a movie title, when you build out a report page, Microsoft likes to give you everything, everywhere, all at the same time, all at once. So everything's turned on by default, which leads to a lot of extra interactions, features, and configurations, which I'd argue overall can actually do and cause a lot of confusion and unnecessary complexity. There's a term called cognitive load, which I like to use and describe, which is the amount of effort it takes to understand a report, and the fewest amount of interactions to let a user accomplish their goals is what I would recommend to have on a report page. Humans are curious, and they will press every button that they come across that they see, or at least a lot of them. And if they don't press it, it's still a distraction if they see it. So default user experiences at a minimum is important. That's something where for the defaults that we can set for a visual. So what page do we start with? What slices and filters have been pre-configured that we have down here? When it comes to the sort order and drill location, what items do we have for either of these as well? So all of these things can help them start their journey. If we think of a report as having a beginning and an end to a conversation every time they open it up, or a journey or a hike that they're taking, how much towards the goalpost can we help them get there? Are we going to have them start at 0, or can we do a certain amount of configurations to help them start at 10 or 20% through their journey? So even with a default experience, like any of the settings that you see here, that will also help to then reduce the complexity because you've already done some of the configurations for them. Now, in conjunction with that, we have a lot of configurations available. The visual headers are an important one. So these items can go a long way to ensuring that only the icons that make sense as a button to click or to view or to analyze are available for the visuals. Sometimes we want to have them turned off entirely. What filter interactions do we have as well? All of these go towards that simplifying and creating a simple report that provides the answers to whatever questions they're trying to ask from the data. Even the filters pane has considerations when it comes to this curation. Now, it's a very useful feature in Power BI, but I would argue that, again, it's the default experience for how it's built can be unnecessarily complex. So we have, at 3 different levels, we have a set of filters in here at 3 scopes. We have the report level, so filters applied here affect the whole report. We have the page level, so any filters here apply to just a particular page. Both of those make sense for the end user to use because those are at scopes that are applicable to the whole report or to a page. Now, I'd argue that visual level filters, those are great for developers, but in general, those are not filters that the typical end user should be interacting with. It wouldn't make sense for a user to go to every single visual on the page and start making filter selections. That's going to cause issues, and it's just not really well designed for that. Now, one thing we want to do as well is kind of break these into 2 sections. We have our report viewer filters, we have our developer filters. And between these two, this is kind of the scopes where we want to break them out. Developer filters ideally should be hidden because then if we hide them from the user experience, it declutters the report and cleans it up. So let me show you kind of what this can look like when we're actually configuring that. We have an option for these configurations to lock and hide. Now, generally what I do is I do both at the same time. It's pretty rare that I'm going to lock a filter but not keep it hidden. And it's also, I don't see a reason to really hide a filter but then not lock it. So they're kind of 2 halves of a coin in my book when I'm building this stuff out. Also, granted, as we'll see in the demo, these things cannot be accessed from or observed for any changes until you publish this to the web. Now, there is a timeline by Microsoft where they are planning to eventually have a reader mode preview in desktop. But today, the only way to see these changes is you must publish it to the service and be looking at it in reader mode, which is the report consumption experience in a workspace or in an app. But take this concept into practice. So if I have a filter here that's applied, it's not locked or hidden, the issue becomes that I'm given something like this, page views by top 10 site pages. So what that does as this is now going to show up in this list. Now, I would also call out the fact that there's kind of redundancy in here. What we have now is a filter showing up here. There we go, filter showing up there, but also filter showing up on the title section. So I want to avoid the need to have this list populated by any developer filters. When they are looking at filters and slicers affecting this visual, I would only expect to see filters for the user that they can add, remove, or modify. So slicers on the page, filters from the filters pane, but that they explicitly can interact with. Anything else should be hidden. So certain filters, such as a visual level filter, might make sense for the report and it's needed for the visual, but it's not necessarily needing to be observed in that filter pane section that we have here for the filters affecting this visual. So this is how I would typically build this out, is to ensure that this list is cleaned up, the visual's been given the appropriate title, and now anytime they apply a slicer, it's very transparent what they've impacted on the report page as far as their filter configurations. So this is part of that curation story that we're going towards. Now, a couple more things that I'll point out, and then I want to go through a demo of kind of putting these into practice and things to help clean up the reporting experience. So similarly, from the visual and report perspective, those icons can be turned off holistically for an entire visual or individually. So at the top level, we can turn on or off the header icons entirely. Within the visual itself, we also have the options for visible and hidden down here to turn them on and off individually, depending on our visual configuration. I'll also show you a theme generator where we can configure the report level defaults from a web page as well and create a custom theme file to do this, depending on our best practices. Now, again, only observable in reader mode for this. So unfortunately, in desktop, these are things that are easily missed, but I'll give you some recommended practices of some shortcuts around this when you're developing this. Last thing kind of on the visual header section as well, there is a useful but somewhat varied feature called the help tooltip option. So that's buried at the bottom of the icons. And when you turn it on, you're given an additional menu that lets you configure this, which provides up to 250 characters of context that can explain the visual, explain the data a little bit. You can also attach it to a report tooltip page potentially as well. So that will allow you to maybe put some dynamic text in there. So you can keep this simple, keep it robust. But let's assume you're using a violin chart or a waterfall chart, and maybe you want to explain exactly the purpose of that type of a visual. You can provide a little bit of text and context into there. Now, generally speaking, I reserve this for reports that has a rotation of users, meaning new users are coming in regularly to look at the report that maybe haven't seen the report before or haven't looked at Power BI before. In this case, this can be very useful in providing context for that to help the user understand exactly what they're looking at, what the visual is telling them. But if you have 10 people that are permanently looking at the report, you have a fixed audience, then those situations, these are less useful. But knowing your audience, knowing their familiarity with Power BI, this is another useful tool that can help further explain the report or the visual. Okay, so now what I want to do is pop over to a demo here. So like I mentioned, what we have, let me zoom back out onto this. There we go. And I'll do that one there. Just zooming in a little bit for the screen. So we have a report page in front of us. I've simplified this to a few visuals that I want to talk about and walking through the user experience interaction. So right now I'm in what is considered reader mode. Now edit mode or Power BI desktop mode is equivalent of pressing this little button up here at the top for the edit mode there. The reading mode is again not available in desktop. So my general practice for this is make all the changes you think are necessary, publish it to the cloud, and then you can actually make your remaining missed changes in the service, re-download the file. So let's go through a bit of an audit process and think about this. So I'm walking through in here, and what I do is I put on my hat as a user, and I'm looking for problems in terms of the actual interface. So what things do I see with moving my mouse around as interactions, distractions, pop-ups? The slicer here. So I'm seeing that I have a button to click for focus mode. Is that something that we would find particularly useful for a slicer? Probably not. So these are things that likely for, and most of the time, I don't have any of these on for a slicer. It does not make sense to have a lot of interactions for a slicer regularly unless, or other than just simply making a selection with it. So opportunities in here where I would likely come in, go to edit. Now I'm in desktop mode. It's the equivalent to making an edit in Power BI desktop, but I'm just doing this in the cloud. Select the slicer, come over to the filter pane, code general, and slicers, I'd argue, we'd want to turn the header icons off entirely. But again, in edit mode, equivalent to desktop, I don't see that change yet. I've turned it off, but I can still see the icons here. This is how it's really easy to miss making these changes in desktop, because you can't observe the output until you're done. But at least you can quickly switch back to reading view, save. There you go, waving the magic wand. Now we can see that the pop-up isn't showing up anymore. So removing distractions, but it's easy to switch back and forth between between edit mode in the service and reading mode in the service when I'm in this workspace. When I'm done with all these changes, what I would do is I would download this file, I would put it back into my Git repository, I'd put it back into the SharePoint repository that I'm saving the folder to. Wherever this file might be getting versioned, I would make sure just to put it back into there. And it's not perfect. I wish I could just do this all much easier in desktop, but this is the fastest way that I've found today to iterate through these. So making the missed changes in the service, just re-download the file when you're done. So continuing on kind of on these discussions, I've turned off the header icon here. You also want to make sure if you're using shapes, we do not want this. You definitely do not need to add a comment to the background shape that you have. So another thing, easy to miss, ensuring that you are applying this. So thankfully now the new shapes and boxes have these turned off by default, but older reports had these on. So header icons should definitely be turned off for shapes as well. Again, going back to the reading mode, reducing distractions, making it seem like it's part of the background. So we want as few icons to service the report as possible. So another one here is all the extra icons that we see at the top. So helper text, useful. It's explaining what the ribbon chart is doing. I gave it context on what the axis is, what the values are within the axis. So useful statistics about the information that we're seeing on the page. Now, however, looking at some of the other ones, do I want to copy the image as a caption? The pin visual, which pins this to a dashboard, I'd argue kind of similar to how Guy on a Cube has described it. Dashboards are largely dead. Not a lot of people use them, but do we need this pin icon to show up at every single visual? So that arguably could come over to the edit, that little pin icon here. I'm going to come to the format. Let's take a look at editing the individual ones in here. Header icons, there we go. A little as a bit of a just pet peeve because I've spent enough time on the product. If I open this up, it bothers me that the first thing is always color that's open. It should just keep it collapsed unless I make changes. But opening this up, turning off pin. We can also turn off a few others if you wanted to, like more options, just to show you some of these disabled. So I can turn this off. I will turn off the copy. Let's just turn off the comment as well, just to give you a little bit of context to see if we turn a few of these off. Come back to reading mode. There we go. Much more cleaned up. I got the filters. I got my information. I can focus mode this, which I still don't love the focus mode, but if clients like to be able to make the visual bigger, they could still utilize that. But I've reduced the icons down in this list. So curating not only holistically, do I turn the icons on and off entirely, but on a particular visual, do I turn individual ones on and off? Two questions, two considerations to have. So coming back to edit mode here, let's look at one other thing with this. Coming back to my general header icons over here. As I mentioned, the help one is kind of buried. So we have over here the help icon. Now nothing shows below it, but if I turn this on, then I get this other menu that pops up that lets me type in that text. Now, I personally would prefer just to take this button. They should just put that right here. They should keep the menu open at all times. They just should have a toggle at the top to turn it on or off. I think it would make the discoverability a lot easier to be able to find it and configure it, but it's something that if and when there are applications to use this, it can be quite useful. You can just put standard text up to 250 characters in here. And you have an option to attach it to a report page if you wanted to add a report page tooltip with charts, visuals, custom text boxes that has advanced formatting, anything you want to. Because you can change this text entirely with the font. You can bold the whole thing as well. So I can bold all of the font in there, but I can't individually like underline a word. There's no option for me to underline any particular word just inside of there. So you can only do that to the whole body. So a report tooltip page would be the ways around adding some advanced formatting and design if you wanted to go that route. Now, on the context of configuring the header icons, Power BI tips theme generator. And I want to show you this really useful theme generator. Let's see if I can actually sign in. So I want to show you the paid version too. Beautiful. Okay, there we go. We're going to go back to themes. Oops. There we go. Okay. So essentially what this does is this lets you configure those defaults that we have. This is, I'd say, zooming in a bit more, this is the best theme generator that you can build. So inside of Power BI Desktop, for some context, I'll just open that up in the background in here, you have the ability to import a theme file that can be built either using the built-in theme builder inside of Power BI, but that has very limited fields in terms of what can actually be built out into there. So I'm just trying to show you in a quick example here. So this, under the View tab, these are your default themes. You have a customized current theme with a very limited amount of options to configure in here, or you can essentially go in and import your custom one using Browse for Themes. So that's what this does. This builds this out. They recently added an option to actually add wireframes per page. So your theme can be a project file with default pages that have had a background added. They've had the scales and resolution already set. So you can build out even a template project file. But for the concept of what I'm showing you under properties, they have all of these properties that are built in globally and per visual. So let's assume that pin icon that's down here, I believe under visual header. So at the global level, let's just assume that I never want to see that pin. So we're going to go down. There's the pin icon. Select to turn on pin icon, changes the visibility. So if I want this up for every new visual, I've now done that. My theme file will have code when imported to that file that every visual that I add will by default have pin disabled. And any of these other ones can also be turned off globally. So all of these settings in here are global. These are master settings for the report. As you can see, there are a lot of settings that can be applied. I actually have mine saved to the web, and every time I notice there's a new thing that I kind of want to set as a default, I come back and edit my theme. Now, otherwise, at the visual level, let's assume there's a slicer that I would like to apply this to. Also notice, by the way, this thing rendering over here, there's two versions of the theme generator. There's a free one, and then there's a $5 a month paid one. The one difference between the two, I can build this entirely end to end. I can spend 2 hours building a theme file for myself for free. And once I download it, though, there's no way for me to edit it in the future. Like if I came back to this tool, I would have to start again. There's no save button. So you get the option to save your theme to the cloud, and it renders an embedded report over on the right to observe changes as I'm making changes to a visual. Those are the two paid features from this. Otherwise, this is a 100% free tool. I will just drop the link into here while I'm showing this. So you can do everything that I'm showing you for free. You just won't get a save button. You can download it, but you won't be able to like make the changes later, and then you don't get that instant rendering. But otherwise, they're identical between each other. I think it's worth a cup of coffee a month to be able to have my theme file saved, because again, I built my theme file and I'm constantly realizing small tweaks that I want to make to it. So I come back to here, make that change as I'm building out a client report, saving my new theme file, come back to it. But back to the idea of visual headers. For my slicer, let's just assume that I want this turned off entirely. So I'm going to come to the show, going to turn that off. That would essentially do what I just did. It disables the visual header. Now, each of these, by the way, the show, all these labels, this actually comes directly from the Microsoft Git repository that documents everything that is configurable for a visual or for anything in the report. So Mike Carlo, who runs Power BI.tips with Mike Carlo and Seth Bowers. They built this tool to automatically scan the GitHub repository, and this menu gets built out based off of the information contained in the JSON in the Git repository. So this is auto-generated. So if you ever happen to see a label that's a little bit vague, like the fact that this is just called show, that's the equivalent in here of this. So that show is this toggle right here. That little toggle button, that's called show in their documentation. So they don't name these things. This is how Microsoft is naming this stuff. So sometimes you'll see weird names. That's an opportunity to provide feedback to them here, or you can provide feedback at the Git repository to let them know to change something. But they are not individually naming this. This is literally just something that they're extracting from the code. Same with that tooltip. The background color for visual header, all built into the Microsoft documentation. They're just extracting it via their tool to build out this interface. But it's a very useful tool. It allows you, again, like to be able to, at least with that paid version, to see the real-time feedback. If I was to come in data label, let's just change the text size to like maybe something else. There you go. If I turn on italicize, so you can see instant feedback on how your card or any other visual would look as you're making these changes in here. So instant feedback is somewhat nice to see embedded before you download it, because otherwise you kind of have to put it into a report to see how that's going to look, especially with font size. It's a little trickier. So this is a helpful instant feedback on your changes. But very useful tool, and it goes a long way to automating this stuff. Why would you want to have to come through and do these things manually over and over again? You should always start with a template file to a degree. And when I say template, I don't mean an actual Power BI template, just a PBIX file that maybe has a calendar already added that's been configured, and your built-in theme that you have with your best practices and defaults. I will say that we're actually in a bit of an exciting time right now when it comes to reporting. So there have been a few tools that have come out recently. I actually have one tomorrow, the Power BI Explorer. We're going to be doing a showcase of this with Matthias Tierbach, Daniel Odekeier. And actually, funnily enough, if you Google that, I only put this online a few days ago, but apparently my YouTube stream that's starting tomorrow is already being listed here. They're going to be doing a deep dive onto their tool, but this thing is going to, in the near future, have an option to, as you can see right here, they're eventually going to release something for analyzing the report. So that's actually going to analyze the report layer file, and a lot of the practices that I've shown today, checking for certain visual header icons, seeing if a visual has some custom configurations besides a theme, all sorts of different report bad practices will be able to be identified and flagged for you so you know where to go. Because kind of the only way to do that today is walking through and literally using your mouse cursor to physically find them. That's painfully slow. So we're, in the next few months, hopefully, about to get a tool that will automate this process. Nothing has ever existed like this before from the reporting layer. There is report optimization for speed, but nothing that actually, from a interaction experience, we've never had anything that truly does user interaction best practices and that does an auto analysis of this. They will demo a couple of things from here tomorrow on my YouTube live stream. And then hopefully in another 2 to 4 months, they'll come back on again to walk through the report practices analyzer. But something I would encourage you to sign up for, test it out. It's they're in the first builds of it are available to download for free. It is made by Tabular Tools, which is kind of a collection between Marco Russo over at SQL BI, Daniel Odekeier, who makes Tabular Editor, and Matthias Tierbach, who makes Power BI PBI Tools. They collectively make this company called Tabular Tools. It kind of rolled out quietly, but we have DAX Optimizer, we have Power BI Explorer. They're going to have other products that is going to be part of this platform. So their whole point is to make free tabular tools that does a lot of cool analysis. So they've released some really amazing stuff. Basically, this thing also does an auto analysis of your measures, and this one's not free. The PBI Explorer is, but what this will do is you extract the metadata from your model, you feed it this, it runs through a scan of that, and it will actually show you basically, if you can just one quick little, there you go. So you can see instantly, oh, I have a measure with a context transition in an iterator. That's going to have a high performance cost. It analyzes and tells you problems with your measures. It's not if the number is wrong or not, but it's performance problems. So I'll say as a developer, if I'm ever handed a file like from a client, like, hey, fix this, I immediately throw it into here and just have it run scans to tell me what are my performantly problematic calculations. So they've released a lot of really cool tools, and it's ran by some really smart people. For those of you at all familiar with DAX, I'm sure you know Marco Russo, and he was heavily involved in this. So him and Alberto, I should probably mention Alberto as well. They're both kind of the gods of the DAX language. So it's cool to see them come out with these assisters and auto optimizers. All right. So 2 tools aside, back to kind of the conversation on some of this curation. The last thing that I want to mention here is filters affecting this visual and the filters pane. So filters affecting this visual, that is this list here. Now, if I was to start to point to things that the user can interact with, those are these 2. So I have a slicer in my filter pane over here, which lets them pick the end period. Does the data go through the end of the prior month, or does it go through today? So it's, do I want an open month in there or not? So that makes sense. Metric is page views is this slicer at the top, so that makes sense. These 2 bottom, these are developer filters. It doesn't even matter what they are. Like, this is not value, does not equal blank, top end that's down here. We want to scrub these out. These should not be showing on this list. So let's curate the experience a little bit. We're going to come over, I'm already in edit mode. So one thing here, there's a locked visual on this at the page level, filters in the page. Let's go ahead and hide that. So at a minimum, that ensures that's not showing. So that's good. We also have a visual level filter here. I also would like, hopefully someday, it would be really useful if we could have something in here which determined what scope that was applied on. So like this is coming from filters on all pages. It would just be nice to know, was this a slicer? Was this a filter over here? Just some icon maybe that indicates where it was coming from. But there's a long laundry list of wishes that I had for Power BI. So coming back, select. Okay, little internet blip, but I think I'm back. Okay.
You're back.
So
Yeah.
we have cleaned this up, and now, yeah, perfect. Yeah, I think thankfully at least Teams gives me a little audio effect if it goes on hold. Okay, filters in this visual, we've cleaned that up. It's simplified to user interactable filters. That's what I would like to see. Now, I want to explain one last problem from the user experience from the front end. So when when the user is using the filters pane, they need to use, better said, I encourage them and developers to have these 2 scopes: filters on all pages, filters on this page. Now, this is a problem that, again, it's kind of a manual process to clean up, but if I select a visual, all of these filters show up. These are like the developer filters that I don't really want to see, and it pushes down the other filters that are relevant to the end user. So this muddies up the waters to have this stuff in here. I don't like to see all these extra visual level filters. That to get back to the ones, you have to scroll down or you have to click off the visual. Now, sadly, today, the only way to really fix this is you have to click the visual, to come over here, you have to click hide one at a time, at a time, at a time. Rinse and repeat. And then once you've done that, and again, it's painfully slow, but unfortunately, there's no official way to do this. You'd have to hack apart the report file. And there are some tools that do that, but it's unofficially supported. So that's why I usually don't walk through that unless you're really experienced with Power BI. But again, technically, you're not supposed to. There's no official support for files that have been modified that way. So saving. Now, click the visual. That doesn't show up. So that is something that you want to ensure that is configured, because it will keep the filter pane clean and simple for them. And then they don't get those weird pop-ups that start shuffling around the filters that they can interact with. So I never want to see a visual level filter. Now I'm hoping someday soon, at least as an interface update, I'd love to see an icon right here or something in the drop down that says hide all visual level filters. I'd also really want to see an option in the file menu that would let me hide visual level filters by default, unhide them if I don't want them to be. Now you might think that maybe there's a way to do that in the tips generator. Unfortunately, there is no option here for the filter pane to be able to hide those by default. So none of these will actually do anything. These are for the actual slicers on the page, but nothing that lets you actually determine visual level filter defaults in this perspective. So sadly, no way today to really, outside of hiding them manually, to do that. But it does go a long way to curating that user experience. It takes time. There is some love that needs to go in from the developer to get these items as I'm showing it to you. But the end result for the end user is going to be much more simplified. Last little thing that I'll just mention as part of this cleanup. Now, this is something that's going to be less relevant for the end user, but more for you as the developer. If you copy and paste a visual a lot and reconfigure it, you'll end up with items like this. Notice that there's no filter applied here, but also there's a little X icon next to it. Now, if you see this scenario, that means that at one point this was in the visual, but it was removed. It's no longer in any of the wells for your visualization. Now, you cannot delete something that is in a well in the visual. So this, notice, has no X because it's here. So if you see that you have a column or a measure inside of the filters affecting this visual that is not filtered and it has an X icon, you can get rid of it because it's not being used for anything. It's developer clutter. The end user is not going to be impacted by it, but it does kind of clutter the filter pane in here. So all of these ones can be removed, and then at least later on, if you're ever coming in to make changes or anything else, you don't have 10 or 15 extra fields in here that are just completely unused and sitting there collecting dust, essentially. So I call them cobwebs. They're things that the user doesn't necessarily see, but it starts to clutter the report. So just make sure that you don't have any X's. It's an easy scan to do. But if it's unfiltered with an X, that is an opportunity like these. Two things that can be, oh, sorry, those should both be undo. This one. That one can be gone. And yeah, so one can be deleted there. That will clean up your experience for the developer down the road. This last thing here, same thing. If you delete a column from the model as a developer, it does not actually delete it from your well in your filters pane. These used to exist in the model, but then they got deleted. So instead of deleting it here or removing it, they just put a warning icon next to it. So also just to make sure that as you're making changes to your model, you won't get an error. Nothing will visibly break, but it's sometimes good to scan the pages to double check that your filters pane doesn't have any broken columns that are contained within there. And then all of that goes towards cleaned up, curated experience. We've hidden the icons, we've kept the pane in here organized and clean, and then again, selecting those visuals will also help you there as well. So I think that's about enough that I want to talk about from the reporting layer. My next conversation that I want to do a bit is on organization and note-taking, as also some practices to assist you with a little bit in Power BI desktop. So let me quickly get that report open here for you. Spin that up. I'm not Power BI. Here we go. Beautiful. Recognize that. Okay, so from a development experience, a few good takeaways that I think will be useful to provide to you in here. One thing that we're going to do is be able to clean up a bit of the fields list. So again, these are things to avoid as a pitfall, best practices to implement as a principle. So one of the big ones that I like to do as part of the fields list that we have over on the right is a pitfall to avoid is if you're creating calculations, it's not a problem to have hundreds of calculations potentially if you need to for your model. Organize them by some type of logical foldering and grouping by purpose, by data set, by location. So this is something that you want to avoid. And the thing to implement instead to avoid this problem is going to be folder organization. Now that can be accomplished from your model view, because the goal of Power BI ideally is you should have models that be a data set, and semantic modeling is kind of the new term that I know they're starting to roll out. But the data set hopefully is being used by more than one report. You do not want an organization with a one-to-one connection with every single report only having one data set. That's going to cause a lot of problems. So opening this up, I'm just going to grab a few and start to I'll put like half of them in folder A, half of them in folder B. So select these two, and you'll see that there's an option for folder, display folder. Now, the first time you add one, you have to type in the name. Let's just call this group A. I'll just say folder A. There we go. Given a shiny little icon up here that creates a folder for it with a hierarchy. That's folder A. Put these into folder B. And now, from a user experience, they have some folder, and it could be called DAX. If they're familiar with that, you can call it metrics, you could call it calculations, whatever term makes sense to represent the calcs that you have for your organization. You open that up, then you get top level A, top level B, whatever they are, and then they can continue to go down. You can also subfolder. So these could be, if you actually use a backslash, so subfolder A, I'm going to do subfolder B. And so you can follow with this. I'm just putting how I'm writing this into here. If you do a backslash like that, you get two subfolders, similarly following down the line. So now they can go to the top folder. Oh, and then some measures in here, some measures. So you can folder, you can subfolder as many times as needed, but getting it down to a few calculations in those that are related to each other helps them find the right calculation easily if they're figuring out what might be available rather than giving them a giant list. Now, a couple of tricks related to this. Let's assume, I grab a few of these. And maybe it's the top. There we go. An S. I just want to show you like the kind of bad design you can potentially have in something like this. Here, I'll put X in there. I'm trying to get them. Yep, here we go. So now, problem is in my top folder, I have a mixture of measures, couple folders, and then more measures. So a trick, if you're going to have one level that's going to have some measures but also folders, because folders have to be also sorted alphabetically, I will usually give that folder, I will start it with like a period. You can't use empty characters. I tried, but maybe like a period in front of the folder title, and then another period in front of that folder title. This anchors it to the top. So I'll start now from the very tip top and show you. So now you can come into the calculations, folder A, and the two folders are now being kept nice and cleanly at the top level, and then your calculations in that top level folder are kept below it. So one little trick to kind of keep those at the top and then the measures below it, or vice versa. If you put a period in front of the measures, they'll keep those at the top. But one trick to organize these, because otherwise alphabetical is enforced to a degree. And then last thing that I want to mention in here is, let's assume that average load time, that was something that belongs in both subfolder A and B. If you put a semicolon in there, and I'll paste the code, subfolder A and subfolder B. It actually puts it in both. Oh yeah, and here we go. It has to be the full query string. So there we go. Perfect. So in this case, 2 different folders that this is contained within. And I put this over here. There you go. So any semicolon that goes in the middle, and an easy, simple one would just be, I'll do multi-folder A. Try one other one, multi-folder. Make this a bit clearer. There we go. That's an easier one to show rather than the subfolders. So that semicolon puts it in both. Now that calculation isn't duplicated. It's one single measure. Notice that if I select one, it selects both. So think of it like a shortcut. It's like a file shortcut. But if you had a calculation like actuals minus budget, does that belong in the actuals folder or does that belong in the budget folder? Which folder should I put that in? How are people going to find it? You can put it in both. So it allows you to kind of be able to section between the two of those when you are wanting to bring those in and to put it into every possible scenario for your end users when building those shared data sets. So a lot of little tricks for foldering and organizing in here. Now, last thing that I'll mention, some of this is organization pitfalls. Another thing that's a problem for a lot of people using shared data sets, and I'll give you an example here, and let's just pop up a quick new workbook, is there's not always transparency on what the calculation is doing. I'll show you what I mean. Just going to quickly grab any data set that's sitting in my cloud. Sure, I'll do my certified one. Fields list opens up. There we go. So I get my model, but I can't see my measures. So if I was to look for any one of these, like what about that one? I don't get any context of what this calculation is. Now, a way around this pitfall of like, what is this calculation doing? The title helps a little bit, but what about if I need more context? So a couple of things you can do. Coming back to my model view, do a simpler one. So you can either, for a calculation, you can give it a description, notes on calculation. So that's one thing that can be done. Can I page views? So if you're connecting to this as a live data set, you'll be given a tooltip with the notes described within. So that's one way to give some transparency, provide context for that. There's actually even a clever blog by Daniel Odekaier where he uses Tabular Editor and ChatGPT, and he asks ChatGPT to explain each measure and write it in the description using a C# script in Tabular Editor. Too advanced to like show it, but just maybe something to Google. I saw a really cool method for him to auto-fill this in using natural language and ChatGPT. But what I'd like to do, and I have a video on my site that actually talks about this, is I have a C# script that takes the measure code and automatically puts it into the description. So then you hover over that, you'll get whatever the actual formula of the measure is. So if that was published to the cloud and somebody was connected in this as a shared data set, this would come up and populate. So one other spot where you can, again, provide some transparency and a pitfall to avoid of what is my calculation supposed to be doing, because it's kind of a black box sometimes. So this can help keep the data set a bit honest and people more confident on the data that they're looking at. Or you have a separate data dictionary managed somewhere else, but this helps. Last thing on notes, and then I think I'll wrap up here officially in a couple minutes. And I also like to leave it open for people to come off mute, raise their hand, ask questions, give me a chance to interact with you a little bit. But we're going to come up to transform data and a few other ways to add notes built into Power BI. So let's go ahead and I'll just do something. This one's easy, so I don't have to connect to the cloud at the moment. So if you ever have a applied step that's doing something complex that you need to explain, so there's actually a useful way to add notes to a particular step. So if you actually right-click on any step and you go to properties, what you can do is you can actually add a description into here. I'm going to channel my inner Bob Ross. Happy little notes. I'll even park a tree in there. There we go. Some notes just typed into this. You get an icon, and when you hover over it, you get an explanation. So I actually never document separately my Power Query logic. I do it built into my queries. So I give appropriate names for my steps. Those are my breadcrumbs of explaining why I'm doing something. So if there's add conditional column, put the column name in there. Added a date logic column, and then if you need further explanation that doesn't fit in the title of the applied step, add some notes into here in the properties pane. So right into there, and that technically adds a commented line before it. So that commented line before a step, if you came in technically to applied steps, here, same thing actually happened. There you go. Notes go in there. So the line above it, commented line, automatically shows up as a note before that. But if you don't want to touch the code, just use the user interface, the properties pane, adds it right into there. Now, also a little pro tip, you can do that at the query level. What is this query for? This query is used for get the notes that pop up. No icon, unfortunately, next to the queries, but at least you get the notes in there. So between explaining what the query does in the note built in here and explaining what they do in the applied steps, I see no reason to have separate documentation for my Power Query. I put it all in line. I comment my measures as well. So we have a description, but if I need to explain anything about my measure in here, I can also type notes into there. So there's a lot, like, there are some reasons to document separately part of a model. Why was this relationship in here? Like maybe some of the reason that this was built a certain way, what these relationships are for, because there's no way to add a relationship to the node itself, but the rest of this stuff can all be commented. Your measures can be commented, your queries can be commented. So a lot of the notes that are needed can be built right into this. And honestly, even the last part for documentation or anything else, I'll often just have a hidden page here and potentially just come in, like insert, stick a text box into here, all notes, and then I'll hide the page. So I'll have a big text box, all my notes typed into here. So as much as I can, I put a significant number of my notes right into Power BI with all of that stuff. So some documentation outside of it can occasionally be useful, like the holistic reasons for certain stuff, but you can build a lot of that in just directly into Power BI. We are at 9:55. Like I said, I do want to leave open for some notes. So what I'm going to do as well is I also want to pop up a couple links for everyone. So give me a second to actually get the plain text in here. These are all the links that you see in front of you. The QR code takes you to my main page. What I also do, one sec, I'll leave this up for a minute. I also, QR code takes you to my main website that has links to my YouTube channel, a lot of the files and templates. Come on. Okay, there you go. I'm back on. Plus all of the other presentations that I've given. And I'll have one other QR code, by the way, just right after this. It's going to put your name into a hat for a raffle. It signs you up for my blog, gives me your email, and then I draw a name out of the hat for you to win a chance to get an hour of half an hour of consulting from me. So you basically get a chance to get on a call with me, chat about anything related to Power BI, have me help you out with something. So it's a chance for you to interact with me, just get a half an hour kind of my expertise on any topic that you want to discuss as well. So that link will be here if you want to sign up for that. But otherwise, like I mentioned, feel free to raise your hand, come off mute if you have any questions. Happy to hang out and chat for a few more minutes as well.
Okay, I don't know if we might have a couple more minutes for people for questions. I did find the second part of what you show. Well, actually, they're both kind of related. The first one where you show the themes, and then the second part where you were talking about, how we can inject more knowledge into some of this stuff is. I was wondering, maybe in just in a couple of minutes, probably you could probably do a whole hour about this. But what have you seen in terms of how do people start to manage their Power BI state when it gets to that level where you just have so many artifacts, right? Is like to your
Yeah,
point,
yeah.
it's like
So
you have a data set, and most companies will have multiple data sets, obviously, and then it's just every time you start a report, you probably don't need to start from scratch, right? But then the question is also like, how do you find all the stuff that you have out there, right? Because the web experience, I mean, I've used it quite a bit, and it's just doesn't seem like really adequate. Is there third-party tools out there, or
I mean, at a
what are people
minimum, you should be
usually doing?
promoting. At a minimum, you should definitely be at least promoting or certifying your data sets. That helps because then instead of all, here's the ones that
Yeah,
you
you can
built,
just
there's your
filter.
endorsed. So like, yeah, there are a few filters here at the top, and then they do have between your data marts, data sets, lake houses, and other fabric stuff now. But the
That's
endorsed
true.
should be the first tab that you should go to, and hopefully you, because you're going to have probably sometimes hundreds of data sets to connect to
Yeah,
here. This
absolutely.
list should be really short. Almost anyone can endorse as long as they have build permissions in a workspace. Certification, the global admin has to set for you in Power BI, but these two do go a long way to giving you the like core data sets that you'd want to connect to. So that's usually my first encouragement for people to check out is the endorsed section.
Okay. Is that usually how you um my guess is you probably do this part of consulting as well, as you help people structure their governance of their Power BI tenants
Yeah,
and stuff, right?
I mean, that's why I honestly I have switched my title from like being I'm not a data analyst. I use architect now these days. Like
Yeah. I mean, even
yeah.
your BizWiz is like it goes beyond Viz, right? Because
Mhm.
these are like governance items, right? They're not even literally
Exactly.
about
I'm an all-purpose
visualization.
wizard.
Yeah.
All-purpose wizard at this
All
point.
purpose all purpose Wiz doesn't come off the tongue as well as the BizWiz.
Exactly.
All
Well,
right.
it doesn't sell as well too. I mean, like a YouTube video on governance is going to have a lot less views on like here's how to make a really cool bullet chart. Oh, everybody wants to watch that. So visuals are
That
much
is
more
true as
universal.
well.
But then usually they say, hey, you like that's a cool visual. Do you also do like X, Y, and Z? Actually, yes. Like I do everything, but visually from an actual video, which is entirely visuals, the front end stuff sells and markets a lot better. So that's why I
Yeah.
like that's the foot in the door, and then usually people reach out to me on other stuff. But yeah, I have very common engagements with clients on architectural needs and issues where I think I probably have 25 different clients over the last 6 years who I'm on retainer, and maybe a couple of times a year, like, hey, can I just get an hour from you? I need to,
Yeah, makes
we're trying to
sense.
set this thing up. And I think this is the path we want to take, but it would be really helpful to get your opinion and to help us verify this is the correct course, because we don't want to build down the wrong path and then shoot ourselves in the foot with time and cost later on if there's a better way to do this. So it's the guidance on helping us. We have 55 dials to turn. What's the proper configuration for our environment? And sometimes a bit of an expertise is needed for that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Double thank you to Reid as well for sharing the knowledge. I will be um, sharing the recording as well on the YouTube channel. Remember, the link to the YouTube channel is in the description of the Meetup group as well. So thank you again, Reid, for your time. Thanks everybody for joining us today. And until next time, stay safe. Bye bye.
Absolutely. And just send me all the links if you can later on. I'll throw this up onto the MVP submission. So that'll be perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Excellent. Cool. All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you again. Bye.